If we're talking about the most overglazed fighter in the UFC right now, I would have to say it's Carlos Prates. And look, I'm not calling him overrated because honestly, we haven't seen enough of him to make that call yet. But the amount of hype that this guy has built in such a short time is just wild. I get it. 4 straight knockouts, staying active, cool name, the Nightmare. All that's great, but let's pump the brakes a little, okay? We really haven't seen this guy get tested yet. And then you got people online already saying some ridiculous stuff like, dude, Prates sleeps JDM and Leon Edwards. Like, come on, let's slow down a bit. Let's at least see him against a real fight before we start throwing him to the top guys. And people are getting way too excited about this guy after his knockout win over Neil Magny. The commentary team was going crazy like, oh damn, who does that to Neil Magny? Like, come on man, I get it. Knocking out Magny looks good on paper, but let's not act like this was some unheard of accomplishment. Michael Morales just finished him in his last fight, and let's be real, Magny has been getting whooped for a while now. He's the definition of a gatekeeper. Everyone gets their turn putting their hands on Neil Magny, except apparently Mike Mallet. Now, don't get it twisted, I'm not here to completely bash Carlos Prates. The guy is good. He's got clean striking, sharp combinations, and real power. His Muay Thai background shows in the way he mixes things up, and when he gets into rhythm, he is a problem. He gets aggressive, keeps the volume high, and when he smells blood, he goes for the kill. That finishing ability is real. And yeah, he's been putting dudes out in violent fashion. His knockouts have been clean, precise, and devastating. One performance that really stood out was his fight on the Dana White Contender Series. He absolutely torched Mitch Ramirez. That was one of those fights where you saw the talent on full display. He was just levels above picking his shots and landing with serious power. That kind of performance put him on the radar. But let's pump the brakes a little. He hasn't faced an elite competition yet. And while his striking did look sharp, what happens when someone doesn't fold under pressure? What happens when he faces a guy who can wrestle or push him into deep waters? We haven't seen him deal with that yet. So before we start hyping him up as the next big thing, let's see how he handles a real big test. Now, don't get me wrong, Carlos Prates is an exciting addition to the UFC welterweight division. However, like all fighters, he has areas where opponents can exploit weaknesses. While his striking is lethal and his grappling credentials are respectable, there are still question marks about how he will fare against the elite competition. One of the biggest questions for any striker coming into the UFC is whether they can handle a strong wrestler who consistently shoots for takedowns. Prates is an absolute killer on the feet, no doubt about it. But what happens when he's dealing with a relentless grappler who doesn't let him get comfortable? Now, let's give credit where it's due. He looked fantastic against Neil the Gatekeeper Magny, stuffing all 7 of Magny's takedown attempts. That's impressive, but are we just going to ignore the fact that Mitch Ramirez actually took him down in the Dana White Contender Series fight? Prates was getting controlled for almost 2 minutes before he worked his way back up. Yeah, he got out of it, but that's still something to think about when we're talking about how he deals with these high level wrestlers. And look, I know Prates is a black belt in BJJ, but the reality is a black belt doesn't always mean much in MMA when you're against elite wrestlers who know how to smother and control you. We've seen it time after time again. Guys with strong jiu-jitsu backgrounds struggling against wrestlers who just don't give them the space to work. And let's not kid ourselves. The welterweight division is stacked with wrestlers. Bilal Muhammad, Sean Brady, Usman, even Leon Edwards when he chooses to mix it up. These are guys who could potentially ragdoll him. Now, I get it. People evolve, fighters improve. Maybe Prates has worked on that part of his game. But here's the thing. We haven't really seen it yet. We haven't seen it get tested against a top tier wrestler in the UFC. And we also haven't seen him submit anyone at this level. Outside of the UFC, he had moments where he's been ragdolled before. Has he leveled up? Maybe. But until we see him against an elite grappler who can really push the pace and who can really push him in those deep waters, that's the question mark there. Another area of concern is whether Prates can sustain his power and movement deep into a fight. We haven't seen him in a grueling 5-round fight yet, and if history has taught us anything, it's that the elite fighter who can push the pace often breaks opponents who rely on striking. Take Rafael Fiziev for an example. an elite Muay Thai fighter who looked unstoppable early on but struggled in the later rounds against Justin Gaethje because of the relentless pressure and volume. Prates is known for his explosive style, but what happens when an opponent like Leon Edwards or Jeff Neal forces him into deep waters? If he gasses out, his striking, his speed, and power diminishes, leaving him vulnerable to get picked apart or even finished. Who knows? And of course, Prates is aggressive, and that's one of the reasons why fans love his style. But aggression can be a double-edged sword when he faces an elite counter-striker. Look at what happened to Yuri Prochazka against Alex Pereira. Yuri thrived on aggression, but against a calculated striker like Pereira, he walked into perfectly timed counters. If Prates can face a well-rounded counter-striker who can exploit his entries, we can see something similar. Fighters like a Wonder Boy or a rising contender like Ian Machado Gary could take advantage of Prates' forward movement and land clean counter shots, putting him in real danger. His head movement and defensive awareness will need to be sharp if he wants to avoid eating unnecessary damage. This is perhaps the biggest unknown. Prates has looked great so far, but the reality is he hasn't fought the absolutely best yet. We've seen countless prospects rise fast only to hit a wall when they reach the top 10. Think of Johnny Walker, came into the UFC looking like a human highlight reel, but once he faced tough competition, his flaws became apparent. Experience at the high level matters. Prates may have fought in different organizations, but the UFC level competition is different. Until he's tested against a true top tier fighter, there's still uncertainty about how he handles adversity in a fight where his game plan isn't working. Carlos Prates, at the end of the day, is an exciting fighter with a ton of potential, but we need to see him against a high-level wrestler, durable opponents with elite cardio, and technical counter-striking before we can even say he's ready for the top 5. Right now, he has the momentum, but how does he handle these stylistic challenges will determine whether he's a future title contender or just another entertaining fighter. The welterweight division is stacked, and if Prates wants to climb to the top, he'll need to prove that he's not just a dangerous striker, but a complete mixed martial artist. Alright, so with all that being said, I do think Carlos Prates has the potential to be that guy. But man, the way people are hyping him up is wild. Like, bro, just chill for a second. Let's see how he actually performs against the real competition before crowning him the next big thing. We literally just saw Peyton Tabit take an L, so you gotta relax. Let's see how Prates handles tougher fights before we start throwing him into dream matchups with the top guys. But hey, I hope he's the real deal. He's a fun fighter to watch, and if he does live to the hype, it'll be great for the division, but only time will tell. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And like always, guys, I'll see you guys on my next one.